With me today are two experts from the education sector, including Lasse Nielsen, Head of Academic Honesty at Ostrava International School in the Czech Republic. Hey, Lasse.
Hi.
and Nicola Blackwell, Territory Manager for Secondary and Further Education across the UK and Europe. Hey, Nicola.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me, guys. Get set to hear their insights on digital literacy and independent research, accidental plagiarism, nurturing confident, responsible and independent digital citizens, and preparing students for the next steps in their academic career. So panelists, if you guys are all happy, we'll get the ball rolling and kick off. Fantastic. So let's start with you, Lasse. How has remote learning impacted cases of academic dishonesty?
Well, I think one of the biggest impacts is that it's gotten a whole lot harder to control the learning environment, and therefore it's gotten a whole lot harder to control testing. I've gotten a lot of feedback from teachers who say that they don't know how to do summative assessments anymore or testing because they are not sure how they can control the students not using, let's say, mobile devices or getting help. So it's definitely been really, really tough, and there's a lot of really good solutions out there. One of the ones I recommend is, if at all possible, do sort of alternative testing, do a more project-based learning. Try to figure out what knowledge are you trying to get, and is there different ways of getting that knowledge than a standard sit-down test? Because at the end of the day, you can never be sure, no matter how many cameras you have on them and parental supervision. It's very difficult.
We're also hearing as well cases of, a lot of parents or siblings helping to do the work, but doing too much of the work for the student, which is obviously also an issue too. In that case, we're not actually able to track the student's understanding of a topic or whatever work they've been set. So that's something that's coming through with the remote learning as well. It's less controlled that one student is doing the work. When they're doing it in class, you can see what's going on. You can't see that in the home environment. So another aspect of academic dishonesty coming through as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys. So Lasse, if academic dishonesty is such an important issue in the sector, why is it that students generally only encounter the issue for the first time once they're in higher education?
That's a good question. I think personally the reason is that it's not really looked for in the younger years. It's not something that we've really tracked that much. And I think that a lot of teachers think that it's something we shouldn't burden students with when they're in the younger years. And while I don't think we should start, ordering students to cite their sources really early, I think it's very important to have a strong ethical foundation, even all the way down to kindergarten. I'm going to our kindergarten in the next couple of weeks to talk to them about the ethics of cheating and in general. And I think it's very important to have that baseline so that when they grow up, they realize that cheating is not something you don't do because you're scared of getting caught. It's something you don't do because you don't get anything out of it learning wise. And I also think it prepares children or students better for when they hit university if they have a strong base in this already. That's my experience, at least from the students that I've taught who went to university and who now come back and say that they're very happy to have gone through all this citation, even though it was very difficult, because now they know how to do it and they're much better prepared.
Thanks, Lasse. Anything to add to that one, Nicola?
Yeah, I'd also say it comes down to the types of assessment that's happening in lower levels of education. So at higher ed, there's quite a lot of written work, your dissertations, theses, etc. at higher levels. But in secondary, there's a lot of leading people to be prepared for exams. That's the main form of assessment. So the focus really isn't on those writing skills and those research skills, citation, paraphrasing, etc. It's really on preparing them to remember information and regurgitate it in an exam setting. So it's difficult at secondary level. There's a lot of pressure on getting the exam results, and then things like the academic writing is kind of forgotten about because it's not a forefront, or it's not something that they're doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So definitely the type of assessment that's happening in the high stakes assessment within secondary plays a part in the emphasis on it. In the UK, back when GCSEs and A levels were more heavily essay based, there was issues of a lot of misconduct coming out. And one of the reasons they looked to move it to being more exam based is, okay, we can control this a bit better. So we'll make an exam setting instead, but cheating still happens in exams. It's just a different kind of cheating. So, you know, having those different kinds of assessment really helps to assess the student better. Some students aren't good in exam settings, but actually still really good with the information that they know and being able to explain it. So yes, I definitely think it's the way assessment's set up, and the focus on assessment at the lower levels is just not the same as at higher ed, where obviously writing is kind of at the core of what you're doing there.
Sure.
Which is also why, is also why I think when we move to digital learning, trying to figure out different ways of assessing students is very important, because a lot of the times we're interested in the knowledge, not necessarily the form that takes. Like, there are some subjects, of course, where it has to be written, but a lot of the times you could do the same thing in a different sort of summative assessment, and you can actually get the knowledge out of them with a limited amount of opportunity to cheat. Could include sort of personal experiences and stuff that are less likely to be found somewhere on the internet.
Thanks, Lasse. I wondered then if you could tell us, are students even aware when they're committing academic dishonesty?
From my personal experience, I did the math on our rate of cheating, and I found that 74% of the students that end up in my office because of some issue with academic dishonesty actually had no idea what they were doing. It wasn't malicious. They basically didn't understand that they had to cite, or they didn't understand how to cite. And this is especially students who come within the middle of a year, or they come from schools where this is not enforced. And you can't really blame them for not knowing, when they've never been taught to do so. So I would say a lot of the times we get students that are brand new to this, and just like with any subject, you don't expect students who've never had math to know how to do math. So you can't expect students who've never tried to cite before to magically know how to do that. Which is why we at my school in the Turnitin International School, we've moved away from a punishment-based approach to a sort of more teaching-based approach to academic honesty, where our first sort of objective is to get them to understand this. And we make a big distinction between accidental and intentional plagiarism, for instance. Because if you punish somebody for something they didn't know, then there is no learning in that. They don't understand how. So a lot of the times I will get a student and I will show them how to do this, and I'll ask them to hand their assignment in again to me, and I will go over it and I will check it again. I had a student hand in the same geography paper 6 times to me before it was okay.
Wow.
But that's completely okay, because in the end he got it. And if he does, if he commits academic dishonesty again, I'm 100% sure that he does it on purpose, because I know he understood it.
Right.
And he hasn't done any, like, he had an incident with some paraphrasing, but that's a skill that he is supposed to be learning now. So I didn't expect him to know that at that point anyway, because we have a gradual ascending skill list. So I'm not expecting 11-year-olds to know how to paraphrase perfectly. So that we have sort of it's taught in a grade, and until that grade, it's something they're reminded about, but it's not something that they're really sort of slammed on if they don't do it correctly. And I think our level of academic dishonesty is decreasing because of this, which is good, I think.
Amazing, thanks, Lasse. So leading on from that, why is it so important to track cases of plagiarism as students progress through the education system?
Well, exactly for the reason that I can see where the student has been. If they know already how to cite, if they know already how to cite and they're choosing not to, then it's a different issue. So a lot of the students that I get, again, they're brand new to this. So what I will do is I will make a memo and I'll share that with all the teachers, which is also very important, because if you have a system where each teacher handles it individually and there's no person who knows all the information, then you end up with the student, being given multiple chances in different subjects, and all the teachers think it's only one incident. So this is why it's very important to track these cases. But also, I think for the students' own benefit, and for your benefit as a teacher, you're trying to teach them, so you need to know where they have different problems. Just like we track grades, we need to track the cases of academic dishonesty.
Yeah, I think as Lasse says, tracking it across the different teachers and the different curriculum subjects that a student is doing. So you can start intervening and helping the students build those skills. Like Lasse said, it's to one teacher, it's one case, but if that's happening in each subject area that they're getting taught in, it's a real fundamental problem with the skill set of the student, not that they're trying to cheat. They obviously just don't understand what's going wrong. So I think the educational side is super important. Sometimes it's, particularly at secondary ed, there's different levels of how it's looked at in the school and across different teachers as well, and how it's dealt with. But it's important to bring that educational approach to it, not just be okay, you've cheated or you've copied or you've plagiarized, we're going to mark you down for that, and it just always being a kind of summative assessment issue. It should be something that's taught throughout a student's education, and then they build those skills naturally, and it doesn't even come to mind that they would even possibly cheat. They don't purposefully do it. A lot of the time we see that it can be through pressures, through bad time management and getting rushed to do their assignment. Okay, how do I do it? I'll just copy from my friend. But we also need to instill best practices in the students. Say, okay, well, you need to prepare better for your assessments, so you give yourself time to write it. So there's a lot of other skills, not just academic writing skills, but other skills that can come off the back of it as well that need to intervene too. And it's important that we're recognizing those issues in the students and helping to correct that.
Thanks, Nicola. So with technology advancing at such a rapid pace, it must be hard to keep up with the means by which today's students cheat. So Lasse, how can educators ensure their plagiarism policies are up to par?
Well, I think very important is to have one in the first place, which I find a lot of places don't have a policy on it. And I don't know if it's because it's like my suspicion is that it's because it's given to the English teacher as being their responsibility. Which I see a lot, and I feel bad for the English teachers because academic honesty is something that's taught, at every level and by every teacher. It's not an English issue only. It's not a language issue only. You can cheat in math just as well as you can teach in German or in English. So I think it's very important to have a policy in the first place. And how we set about making ours is basically we made one based on, okay, what did we want to do with it? What was the point of it? What was the problem with academic honesty at our school? Our problem was we had a lot of children who ended up cheating because they didn't know what cheating was. So we made a policy around that core of, okay, what is the output? Well, what do we want them to do after that? So you have to figure out as a school, what is it you want to do? What is the problem? And then you make your policy based on that. There's a lot of good policies out there, I would say, for inspiration. I know the IB, I'm from an IB school, and they have sort of their guidelines. We make our guidelines a little bit differently, but we use them as inspiration. And how to keep them up to date, I think it's very important to look at the newer software coming out there. There's a lot of new things that are presenting themselves as being legitimate writing tools that are not, like these paragraph spinners, word spinners, I think they're called, where you plot in a piece of text and it spins it so that you get something that is not the same. It won't be picked up by a plagiarism checker, but you didn't write it. And these sort of things. And again, the Turnitin does a lot of work to minimize this, but also a lot of it is just explaining to the kids that this is not okay, because these sites present themselves as being legitimate sites.
Thanks, Lasse. So in this new remote learning environment, what are some of the biggest challenges teachers have to navigate when it comes to maintaining academic integrity? And how is Turnitin supporting them in this process?
For us, we use the Turnitin feedback studio a lot, where basically I just told the story of the student who handed in his work 6 or 7 times. So what he did was he uploaded it to Turnitin. We went into the feedback studio and I showed him where it pops up, where there are problems. And then he went back and he fixed it and he handed it in again and it showed up again. And in the end, he was able to do this without me, this process. So he's taking agency over his own learning, and he's, he doesn't have to feel so scared, that I will see it, because he can basically hand me a final product and he gets as many tries as he wants just to check it. So that's how we use, that's one of the great benefits of Turnitin that we use at our school.
Yeah, I would definitely add to that, using it formatively, as kind of the theme's been throughout these questions, is really bringing the student along with that journey. And part of that is actually getting them to use Turnitin themselves, getting them to look at their own reports and self-check their own work. So really putting ownership on the student to produce original work and recognize where they may be going wrong, or it being just a topic that they can freely discuss with their teacher to say, look, I got my report, it's shown really high, I really don't know where I've gone wrong with it, because I don't feel like I have tried to cheat or not paraphrase correctly, whatever it might be. And so it's putting ownership on that. So we've made some advancements with the technology to help with a more formative use. So we've recently released Draft Coach, which is the ability to use the Turnitin functionality of the report within the student drafting environment. So within the Google Docs environment, where they're writing their assessment, they can have a panel at the side of their work showing where they may have missed a citation, and there's different flags and different information that will be surfaced for the student. And we have similar technology available through Microsoft Teams as well. So it's really kind of giving the students some formative help in learning while they're actually drafting, to help out the teacher in that, in that space where the teacher's not there while they're writing their work. And then it gives them some ownership on checking and being more aware of that as well, where they may be going wrong with the writing. And like I say, helps them to bring that conversation up with their teacher. If they're unsure, it makes it more okay, I suppose, not that, I might have cheated, or it might look like I've cheated, but I haven't purposefully cheated. You want to make them be able to have that conversation and it be just a normal thing. And it's then for the teacher to recognize, okay, actually your citation skills aren't great here, or your paraphrasing skills aren't great. Let's give you a bit more help in that. So really bringing alive that formative side of things. On the flip side though, as teachers in this online environment, like we said before, it's difficult to know, is the student writing their own work? For example, is it not a parent or a sibling doing it for them, or are they getting help from teachers? We've spoke to teachers who said there's WhatsApp groups where the students are sharing their answers to things and submitting them. So it can also help on the flip side of things as well, for the teacher just to see what's going on within their class when they run the reports on the work. Are a lot of them coming up with the same information, and therefore, okay, it looks like they've been, sharing that information across the student set. So it works both from a formative and more summative side, with the teacher as well, surfacing information for them too.
Thanks so much, Nicola. So Lasse, back to you. Could you tell us some of your top tips for teaching younger students about academic honesty?
Yeah, I use a lot of analogies. I do a lot of games. For the really young students, I use Peppa Pig because there's an episode where she has to make a castle, and it ends up being the parents who make the castle for her. And I think they address that really well, sort of between the lines. And I use it as an example because it's the kids like it. I'm talking now about primary school kids, of course. However, you could show it to older kids. I think they would get a laugh out of it. And just these simple ideas of, we don't allow cheating in many other parts. If they're playing a board game and they cheat, they would get very angry, but they have no problem doing it on a test. And it's sort of they're cheating themselves, but I would argue is even worse. So stuff like that. I think very important is you have to make the topic approachable for them. You can't make it something that they're scared of. Then, if you're the plagiarism monster, they're not going to have an open discussion with you about it. If you make sure that you're not trying to get them. That's not, you have to go away from this cat and mouse where you have to catch them and they have to avoid being caught. You have to go away from that and simply have a discussion with them, make them more responsible for their own learning. Then you can discuss with them on an open level, and they can tell you their frustrations, their reason why they might cheat, and you can have a more philosophical debate about it. And again, I use I don't know if you can see it here. I'll try to upload it. This is my little quiz for them. I basically wrote a quiz out where I give them theoretical sort of questions. Like John and Mandy are working after school. John doesn't have time, so he copies Mandy's homework. Is that allowed or not? Again, for a little bit younger kids, but you could scale it up to have more difficult situation and just sort of gauge what their level of ideas are within this, where they fall on that moral spectrum. And then you go from there. But I think it's very important that you take time to do this with them. Like I have time, I have sort of mini seminars for all my kids throughout the levels. We're not a big school, so it's easier for me to do, but it's very important that it's addressed seriously, and but in an interesting way for them.
I think also bringing kind of real world examples. It can be a bit boring for them to say, oh, let's talk about cheating in your piece of work in an academic setting. But actually what we're trying to do is create honest citizens at the end of the day, and take that into their career and their life outside of that. So, there's cases of potential music plagiarism in the press with big stars that you can bring real life examples to. Looking in a career setting as well, there's cases of misconduct in, there's the paper, Miley Cyrus and Ed Sheeran, but there's cases of misconduct in a career setting as well, where there's cases of people missing out on their kind of CPD, which causes potentially, fatal consequences if there's a topic that the professionals missed or they've copied because they've not had time. But if they're in a medical setting and then that affects a patient's health, that's a real, critical issue. And it really comes from building out, an honest citizen and someone who wants to do the right thing, and not just think, oh, let's bypass because it doesn't really matter and I haven't got time to do it. And the quickest way for me to finish it is just to copy this or just to submit that. It's really shown the students that there's a true important aspect to this when they get into the real world as well, and not just when they're in an exam setting or assessment setting, but it really does transfer skills into life when they go on to have their careers as well.
Thanks so much, Nicola. I'm sure everyone at home will agree that that's some really helpful advice there. So final question now, guys, before I open the floor to some of our audience's questions. I'd just like to ask Lasse first, what do you think lies in store for the future of plagiarism technology in education in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I can answer that in any way that doesn't promote fear and panic, but I'll try. No, I'm actually quite optimistic because if you look at as well, I can see the level sort of that, technology gets better, but that's both better for cheating and for detection. Where I think we need to focus as well is not only on the technological aspect of it, but also on the more emotional and more philosophical aspect. That the best way for students to avoid cheating is if they don't cheat because they don't want to. We're sort of going into academic honesty with this assumption that if students can, they will cheat. And that's where we're going into it. And that's not necessarily a bad idea because, some students will, but I think if we flip that around and say, can we make students not want to cheat? And I think that needs to start happening at a lower level. And I think we need to approach this not in high school, but way earlier. If we do it in high school, it's definitely better than waiting till university, but I think we need to do it way earlier. But what I think is going to happen in terms of the future is I think there's going to be a lot more AI writing tools. I think it's already used now in some aspects of journalism, not in an academically honest way, of course, but these tools are getting better and better at writing cohesive pieces of text. So this is what I worry about, and I worry about the detection, especially now with the paper mills. It's very difficult to detect. Luckily, Turnitin is doing a lot of work there, as Nicola will tell us. But it's very difficult. And I would say a lot of the times, a lot of what I get is teacher intuition goes a long way. And if you back that with Turnitin, it's a very solid piece of evidence to have for your teachers and for yourself.
Thanks, Lasse.
Yeah.
Nicola, sorry.
Yeah, so just to add on the technology side, plagiarism's evolved over time, and it will continue to keep evolving with the digital capabilities that we have now. So, back when Turnitin started over 20 years ago, it was an issue of peer-to-peer collusion, and then the internet started forming, and that was another area to potentially plagiarize from. Then accessibility to journals, publications, books went from just being in a library to being digital. So it was easy to kind of copy and paste and use stuff rather than have to get a book and rewrite it out. So it's constantly evolving. Right now, trends that we're seeing is computer code plagiarism. Obviously, computer code, massive industry. And we're seeing plagiarism happen in that aspect area as well. We're seeing things like mosaic plagiarism too. So as Lasse said earlier, kind of those paraphrase spinners, word spinners software where they can put information in and it spins it out and looks original It doesn't look like the original piece of work. So we're constantly adapting our technology to help facilitate check-in for these issues. I think the important thing is to remember is it always has to go hand in hand with the pedagogy side and the teaching side of things. It's not a case of you've got a plagiarism check-in solution that can do it all for you. And we basically surface information to help you as an educator make a decision on what's going wrong here with this student. Is it potentially purposeful plagiarism? Is it something else that you need to investigate with the student? So it's super important for teaching pedagogy to come side by side with the technology, and we will continue developing technology to help support the problems that we're hearing and the problems that the teachers face that they can't kind of solve themselves without having some technological assistance. As Lasse said, one of the big things just now is definitely kind of contract cheating, essay writing mills. It's a huge multi-million-pound business right now. You can go online, type in any kind of assessment, and you can get a prepaid one. You can get someone to make one for you. And really that's not caught in a traditional plagiarism check-in manner, because it's not text-to-text similarity. It's actually someone else producing an original piece of work. It's just not the person that you were meant to be producing that work. So again, we've adapted our technology. As I mentioned earlier, we've got technology to check for unoriginal content and contract cheating in terms of using forensic linguistics to check the student's writing style. Is that changing a lot? And what level of writing were they at? And now suddenly they've shot up to a way higher level than they were. That's potentially a suspicion. So we're surfacing a lot of information for educators to use to establish what's going on, and could it potentially not be their own piece of work. And then, as Lasse said as well, AI is a huge thing right now. So the kind of essay mills and contract cheating sites, they'll become more sophisticated, and we're already seeing that. They can use AI to produce quicker assessments for kids, and that will allow it to be more accessible to a lower level because it'll be cheaper. They won't have to have some PhD student write for them. They'll be able to program a computer to say, okay, spin out an essay about this topic, and it will be a cheaper option for kids at a lower level who have pocket money to spend. They have accessibility to cards and money nowadays, so that's kind of the next advancement. And like I say, we're always looking forward to make sure we can support as much as possible with technology to surface these issues.
I will say as well, we had a case like this some years ago where a student produced a piece of work that was way above the level. And I strongly suspected that this was the work of an essay mill or something like that, because they were using literature that was way above the level of anything that they've studied. And the parents might have been involved as well. It was a high pressure family, like a lot of pressure on that kid to do very well. And what we ended up doing was actually have that student produce the work in an isolated setting. So in order to see, okay, we're going to have you produce a similar piece of work and then see if it matches up. And the student was able to sort of do that. I still suspect that the students really studied in order to be able to do that, but at least they got some knowledge in that way.
Yeah.
So at the end, it kind of worked for them and for us. And that's not, of course, not a perfect way to do it, but it is sort of the only way we have to avoid collusion, because we can't detect it. So we tell our parents we reserve the right to have your student reproduce work if we suspect collusion. And for the few times it has happened, we've had students reproduce work that we say, okay, that's fine, you did it. And that might have been the student just really sat down and learned all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we want them to learn. So that's if that's what it takes. But
fantastic, thank you guys. We've had heaps and heaps of questions. I'm not sure if you've seen them coming in. I'll just say to the audience at home, if we don't have time to answer them all, we'll have some representatives from Turnitin answer your questions after the webinar. So I'll just kick off with some that got sent prior to the broadcast today. So first of all, someone asked, I would like to hear views and opinions regarding similarity and plagiarism and the link between the student's answer and the memo. When a student answers the question according to the memo, but the answer is copied from the textbook, does it count as dishonesty?
I would say probably not if it's cited correctly. But I think it's very important here to remember that you can write a very academically honest paper that is not very good. The example I like to use is that if I'm asked to write an essay and I copy somebody's essay and put a citation, it is 100% academically honest, but it's not a very good essay because I haven't done any of the work. So this is really a teacher issue, where you have some teachers say, okay, I allow about 30% quotations in my essay, because otherwise, you have to do the analysis yourself. And that also depends on what type of essay. Is it an argumentative essay? Is it a research paper? What sort of work are you doing? But I would say, it doesn't count as plagiarism if it is cited, as far as I know.
Fab, thank you. So in what ways could we effectively prove if a student has used an essay mill or had external assistance? It could be justified that they have naturally improved their performance.
Yeah, so I'd say, as I was mentioning, we've developed technology. Our originality solution looks at forensic linguistics and the metadata on an assessment, a bunch of different information that we can surface in data, but looks against the student's set of papers. So it can really show outliers and where the student's level of work is and what's different about a piece of work to how they've written the last 5 pieces of work. So rightly so, you expect your students to improve, but do you expect them to jump from writing at a kind of a low level setting, say in higher education, first year level versus kind of PhD level? No, you don't expect them to jump that fast, that quickly. So it's really surfacing all that information to a teacher or a lecturer to actually see, okay, what looks different here, and then take that information to the student and have a conversation with them about it. It's about bringing evidence to the table that can support you in your gut feeling of, I'm not sure this is the student's work. And that's where it really starts, from that gut feeling as an educator of, yeah, this doesn't look like their typical writing style, or this doesn't look like how they usually produce a piece of work, or the level that they're at suddenly shot up. It's really supporting that gut instinct with some evidence and information to take to that conversation with the student and surface further details around that. It could be you have a conversation and the students, they've said, yeah, I've been really studying hard recently. I've, got some extra help with my studies, and I feel like I have improved. So you can take that information and really surface and unlock kind of your suspicion and make a judgment on what you think is going on there.
Thanks so much, Nicola. So that leads nicely on to the next question from the audience, which was, how do we get the right balance of picking up academic misconduct incidents without staff being overly suspicious or critical, and what tools are available to support this?
I would say my personal experience is that I have it the other way. I think we tend to be more lax and we tend not to look for it because it's more work. It's often uncomfortable confrontations with students that we have to have. So I don't think I've ever experienced it being, teachers being too suspicious. Also because, you have to have some evidence to guide you. So I think my experience, teachers are pretty good at sort of narrowing down, okay, is this their work or not? And I think, again, as Nicola said, it depends on the level of the jump from one paper to the other. And often it's easy to tell. And, with some levels of collusion, of course, it's not. But I think it, again, might be better to be more suspicious than less, because at the end of the day, if we're not looking for this, we're doing them a disservice. It's uncomfortable now, and they will fight it because they don't want to do it. But at the end of the day, they will thank you in the future for having this, for having done it now. So.
Yeah, I would add to that. It's about having the joint approach of having some technology to help you with that, but also, having some awareness. Like Lasse said, most of the educators that I speak to, obviously I work typically with secondary further ed, it's not front of mind with them. They're like, oh yeah, we know our students probably copy and paste, but they're, in a college setting, it might be more of a vocational course. So they're kind of doing physical things, and the essay writing is just a small part of it, and they don't put a lot of emphasis on the importance of that being original. It's just more of a tick box exercise to complete that work that they need to do. So it's really, the staff, super important for the teachers, lecturers to put an importance on it and to look out for this kind of thing, and to understand it themselves, and also have that technology to support, to surface any problems that might arise. And it's easy for stuff to slip through the net, or when there's pressure, you've got a stack of papers to mark. Are you really paying as much attention to the first one as the 50th or the 100th student's piece of work that you mark? And probably not. So the technology helps to keep the consistent approach across, and the fairness. At the end of the day, it's the fairness to the student. If you're catching out someone because you're really super alert with your first group of assessments that you're marking, but by the time you get to the end of them, you're not that alert anymore, and you're really kind of losing faith in your marking, you're not giving the student the same opportunities across the board, and potentially missing out on feeding back to a student that's later in the marking pile than the first student where you were super on top of it with. So it's really fairness across the student body as well. And like Lasse said, it's a disjustice to the student if they're not producing original work and you're not helping them to understand why they're not doing that and where the knowledge gaps are. They're really missing out on their learning. That's the number one problem with it.
Sure. So another question here, guys, that was sent prior to us kicking off today. Do students consider the possible risk of being caught or not being caught? And do they think about whether it's actually worth it before they commit academic dishonesty?
I think a lot of students, again, they're under a lot of pressure, especially in the later years, and they might not even give it a second thought. I had a case some years ago with a student who, it was blatant, like Turnitin lit up like a Christmas tree when we uploaded his paper. The whole thing was plagiarized, basically. And we talked to him and he said, yeah, I know, I had to get something off my plate, right? So in this case, we used Turnitin as a flag for him to get some counseling and get some help, because he was overworked, right? So it's not always a malicious thing. Like, yes, he cheated on purpose, but it was an indicator of something more serious. So our approach was a little bit different than your run-of-the-mill plagiarism case. So he didn't consider it. And I think a lot of students don't consider it. And it depends on also, what is the mentality of the student? And where are you, in terms of what is the general mentality of the student? Is it it's not cheating if you don't get caught sort of mentality that they have? Or is it I am not that good at this, so I'm more likely to cheat, which is also a big thing, and I would say use all the data you have to analyze, why is the student cheating? Are they cheating because they need more help? Because that might be a case. They might think that the only chance they have is to cheat. So I think a lot of the times it's hard to say in general, but I think many students, they don't consider they consider cheating their last option. So.
Thanks, Lasse.
Yeah, a lot of what we hear is it's not, purposeful plagiarism most of the time. It is to do with other things that are going on. Like Lasse said, it can also point to looking out for issues that you're not aware of. We can even see when a student's submitting their work, if they're submitting their work a lot kind of in the middle of the night, we're thinking, okay, why are they up late doing work? It's a chance to have a conversation, say, okay, what's going on here? You're submitting your work and it's strange hours. What's happening in your home life, for example? And we've seen cases of that come up where students have said, okay, well, actually, yeah, I'm having XYZ issues at home, and that's why I'm then on my computer late at night and submitting work. So it's really important to understand the intent of the student. And a lot of the time, the intent isn't to cheat, but it's other pressures that puts them down that route. And that's really important to address those issues. And then obviously you're always going to get the odd cases of people who do want to try and cheat the system, and they do want to they think that they can't do anything else, so let's just copy something or submit some piece of work that is cheated. So it's important, again, the technology supports in finding out and surfacing all these issues that are arising for the educator to then address it with the students directly and deal with that as they need to.
Thanks, Nicola. Another question here. My question is about academic integrity. How do we measure it? I ask this because it is a fine quality and is talked about a lot in the context of academic dishonesty, cheating, and plagiarism. Many people claim to have it, and institutions worldwide talk about it at length on their websites, also using the term in their marketing. But how do they really have it without proof, measurements, or some kind of validation?
I would say many times you don't know if people have it until they're forced to show it to you. It's very easy to say you have an academic integrity, but there's a lot of schools that have a 0% academic dishonesty rate, but they also don't look for it. So, I mean, probably not the right statistics there. So it's really hard to say. I would say I would be more inclined to to see people admit to having, like, if you look at a school and say, okay, this school claims to be have academic integrity. Well, are they looking for it? Is it something that they deal with? Is it something that they're aware of? And that's much more, I think, accurate than just somebody who say, no, our students would never cheat, because that's just not the reality of all students everywhere.
Yeah, a lot of schools I speak to kind of, they don't realize they've got a problem until they have a problem. So it's kind of just pushed to the side of, yeah, of course, we don't have any issues with that. But when actually something surfaces, like an awarding organization picks up that there's some collusion or some form of malpractice in the assessment, then they start to take notice and then really look at everything. And I think, as we talked about earlier, it's important to have a policy in place, first and foremost, that everyone subscribes to across the institution, that all teachers are aware of. Like Lasse said, it's not just the English teachers' problem because it's seen as a writing thing. It is across the board, consistent approach from all staff, and all students are aware of it as well. So there should be, guidance and training consistently to staff and to students to both understand the implications of potential plagiarism and why it's important, most of all, to not plagiarize. So I think that consistent approach is definitely something that is definitely starting to build, but you don't see as often, particularly in schools. It's kind of better at further education and obviously much more prevalent in higher education. So it's certainly trickling down into secondary ed, and certain programs are better at it than others. Like the IB, for example, a core value of theirs is academic honesty. So it's really ingrained in everything that they do. And from the start, every subject area, that's a value that's ingrained in there. And I'd definitely like to see that more in other kind of school types and state education as well, more emphasis put on that. But I think a consistent approach is super important, that it's not just left to one teacher or, an individual teacher to see the importance in it. It's something that is consistently taught in their CPD and spoken around.
Also, I would say in terms of having a policy, it really helps the student and the parents as well, because they can reference somewhere. They know the rules. It's not like a vague term that they don't know whether or not they fit into when they write a paper. And also for the teachers to be able to have evidence to say, okay, this is a breach of policy, because it states here what plagiarism is, and what you did is plagiarism. Is not just something I'm making up on the spot. That really helps as well for the teachers to back up the charge of academic dishonesty if they have a meeting with parents, or if they're accusing a student of malpractice, then they can point to where it was. And again, important to that is to make sure that students then understand that policy, and that parents are aware that policy exists and that they've read it. Then teachers are less likely to get into arguments with parents or with students, because it should be very clear cut.
Thanks so much, guys. We've had so many questions, so let's just try and answer a couple more before we round it up. One sent here: do you think the competitive nature of education is behind a lot of the misconduct we see? It seems learning isn't the main driver for students to go to school/university.
I would say, yeah. I think, unfortunately, I see it a lot with parents, especially because sometimes you have tutors, and tutors, they work on basically, if they don't get the student level up, they get fired. So it's very easy for them to be, okay, then I'll help them a little bit more than I should. And this is because some parents, they don't realize that what we're after is the journey. We're not after a certain mark. If a student has shown that they can move from here to here with a great amount of learning, that's worth much more than them getting an A or whatever mark scheme you use, the top mark. But that sort of sometimes is lost because you have parents who come from a very traditional form of education into a 21st century model of education, and they don't really understand that transition. So it puts a lot of pressure on the tutors to perform, where a tutor really should be able to guide them more and let them make their own mistakes, but they're seen as being failures in the eyes of the parents if they don't, help them have flawless assignments. So yeah, there's a lot of competition and, a lot of pressure to get the top marks to go to the top universities. So I can totally understand why some students are feeling stressed, which is why, I'm really using the tools.
Thanks, Lasse. Another question here. Should we, meaning teachers, change methods instead of using conventional assessments?
I think we should when we go to online learning. Definitely, I think it's. I don't think we can do assessments online the same way as we do in class. I don't. At least not honestly. I think it's just impossible. I can't tell you a foolproof way of doing that because we're still new to this as well. I've tried doing some sort of more project-based assignments. I've really, what I do is I study my test and I think, okay, what knowledge am I trying to get out of the student? And is there any other way I can do that than a sit down, multiple choice sort of test? And sometimes that works. Within the IB framework, I think it works easy at times. But I can totally understand why there are some subjects that need these. And I think you have to have a level of trust with your students, of course. We've tried some where we had parents sitting next to the students and we could see both parent and student, but again, you have to also trust the parent. And some parents are very focused on the kids getting a good grade, more focused on that than the actual learning process. So it's very difficult. I can't give an ultimate answer, but I would say try your best to find alternative testing methods if at all possible, because there's just no way you can be 100% academically honest in an online setting.
Thanks so much, Lasse. Let's squeeze in one more question because honestly, the conversation's really been kicking off during this session, guys. So question here from Irene. What about training on this for teachers? In my experience, not all teachers are on board with integrity or have the skills.
I think definitely true. I train our teachers here. I try my best to get training myself because again, I've been to the university for a while, and even there I would say is often lacking as well. So there's really not many places you can go to. I do a lot of the Turnitin events that are around here that I try to do as best I can because it's great. They're free and they're for everybody, and that's really nice. And I try to educate myself, but it takes time, and I basically try to teach it to as many of my staff members as I can. And I use the Turnitin blog as well. Plagiarism. I think plagiarism.com is also very good. There's a lot of information out there, and also just in general, I think looking for it is the first step, and getting sure your teachers understand why they should bother with this.
I think where I've seen it be much more successful as well is having somebody, an internal champion, take charge of this. Obviously, Lasse, it's his remit in his school, but not many people have kind of someone who looks after academic integrity, after academic honesty, and particularly at secondary further education, it's kind of left in this no man's land and no one really takes ownership of it. They know there's a policy or malpractice information somewhere, but there's no one taking ownership of it. And I think the first thing is have someone who takes ownership of that and puts on, sessions for teachers, for students to start the conversation. And like Lasse said, it's a continuing thing that you learn about and you continue to adapt to. But yeah, that ownership part I think is definitely missing in a lot of institutions, and that's where it doesn't then get its kind of spotlight on that to make sure everyone's on the same page and everyone's learning about it and utilizing technology or different kinds of assessment types to ensure that's not going on.
But make sure, I would say, really important is if you do point to somebody and say, okay, you will have this job now of doing this. It should be something that comes with time. So that should be taking time out of that schedule for that person to do that, because otherwise it's almost impossible. There is a lot of time involved in it, and you're not going to find somebody take it seriously if they're just going to be added more things on top of their already full schedule. Because I've never seen a teacher that wasn't busy, so I don't know if they exist.
Yeah. There's so much pressure on teachers nowadays to do everything is just super impossible. There has to be some sort of focus.
Especially a lot of pressure on them given the current landscape.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys. That's really, unfortunately, all we've got time for. I'll just reiterate to the audience, there are so many questions. Thank you so much. We do a whole other webinar just from all your questions today. But we will try our best to get back to you. Turnitin will try and supply you some answers to those questions. But all of us here at EdQuarter would like to thank our expert panel, Lasse Nielsen, Head of Academic Honesty at Ostrava International School in the Czech Republic, and Nicola Blackwell, Territory Manager for Secondary and Further Ed across the UK and Europe. And obviously, thanks to you, our audience, for joining us today. Please visit www.turnitin.com to see all the amazing solutions and tools they've got to offer. And to stay up to date with the latest education news and keep tabs on our exciting webinar schedule, please visit the EdQuarter platforms on edtechnology.co.uk, universitybusiness.co.uk, and ie-today.co.uk. But have a great day. Thanks, guys. Thanks, panelists. You're wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you all again soon, we hope.
Bye.
Bye.